Hello everyone, my name is Juliet and there is something I need to discuss with you. So, what I need to discuss goes back all the way to 2004 when the Gender Recognition Act, or GRA as it's also known, was first passed. Now, when it was initially passed, it was a groundbreaking and world-leading piece of legislation. There was pretty much nothing like it in the world at all. So, great. What it did, it allowed people to change the gender marker on their birth certificate. That's it. That's all it does. The process which you have to go through for that is very long-winded. It costs quite a bit of money. It's very intrusive. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and ultimately it's decided by three people who you never get to meet. These three people get to decide what your future will be. Why would somebody want to change the gender marker on their birth certificate? It can be helpful when you're applying for jobs. Now, employers aren't meant to. They're not meant to discriminate against gender identity when they are employing someone. However, we have seen probably about 6 months ago now, that it does happen, and Debenhams had to settle out of court because somebody who was interviewing for a job, interview was going really well until they pulled out their birth certificate, and it showed that that person was transgender. And at that point, the interview went south and they didn't get the job. Later transpired that it was specifically to do with the fact that they were transgender, so they had to settle out of court. So it proves that it is an issue, and you do need sometimes to change your gender on your birth certificate to help you get jobs. Another reason you might want to change it is so that when you're getting married, that your gender is recorded as your true gender rather than your gender assigned at birth. And the other reason for when your gender is recorded in your death certificate, it reflects your true identity. That's all the Gender Recognition Act does. It does not give access to single-sex spaces. It has no impact on that whatsoever. The piece of legislation that gives trans people access to those spaces is the Equality Act, which was passed in 2010. And you do not need a gender recognition certificate in order to access these spaces. It does not impact on cisgender people in any way, shape or form. It just doesn't. And it certainly doesn't infringe on women's rights. So that was passed in 2004. Let's jump forward a little bit. In 2016, on the other side of the Atlantic, North Carolina passed its, by now, pretty infamous bathroom bill. What this bill did, it restricted people's access to public toilets to their gender when they were born, their gender assigned at birth. I remember in 2016 when this was first passed, I was in shock, and I despaired that something like this could be passed in a Western country where people were supposed to be more accepting and more aware of issues such as this. I was still in the closet back in 2016, very firmly still in the closet. I had been out a few times and I had used a women's toilet like once or twice at that point, and it was a truly terrifying thing for me to experience. The thought of doing that and then at any point a police officer could burst in and drag me out of that toilet. You may say I am being over the top at this point, but it literally happened. Hundreds, if not thousands, of trans women received abuse and were physically ejected from women's toilets in North Carolina. But at the same time, I was just thinking to myself, I'm glad I live in the UK. I'm glad I live in a country where nothing like this would ever happen. I was still in the closet, but, you know, I thought someday I would be out and happy and proud. And that day did come. And it reassured me that I thought this was never going to happen in my country. Not in the UK. So what were the outcomes of this bill? Basically it meant that trans people struggled just to go about their day-to-day lives. And bear in mind, this isn't some hypothetical situation. This is what happened when they passed this bill. So they couldn't use any public toilets. So if they didn't know somewhere they could use a toilet, they basically had to shorten the amount of time that they were out in case they had a call of nature. So going out shopping for the day, going to the theatre or the cinema, anything like that became an issue. Just things that people take for granted in their day-to-day lives was an issue. But it didn't just affect trans women. It wasn't just trans women affected. It also affected cisgender women. Any woman that didn't match the feminine ideal, who weren't pretty enough, who didn't have long hair, who didn't wear makeup, who didn't wear clothes considered feminine, were accosted and their presence was challenged. And videos emerged of cisgendered women who have been women since birth, being physically ejected from the toilet by male police officers. You can find the videos online now. It's not hard. And this leads to the exact opposite of what this bill was supposed to achieve. Men were going into these single-sex spaces and they were accosting cisgender women and physically imposing themselves on them and dragging them out the toilet because they couldn't prove they were women assigned female at birth. The law was eventually overturned in 2019 by a federal judge. Back to this country. In 2017, then Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, Theresa May, promised reform to the Gender Recognition Act. She proposed that we move to a system of self-identification. Now, this is a system used in many countries. It's used in Argentina, in Portugal, in Iceland, and other countries, especially in Ireland, which is our closest neighbour. Now, this is a system that has not caused any increase in violence in single-sex spaces. Again, because it doesn't affect access to those spaces. So, after Theresa May promised the reforms, in 2018 there was a public consultation. It lasted for 2 or 3 months. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head. And it got a lot of responses. It got more responses than the government expected. It had over 100,000 responses. So we were promised the results for that in the spring of 2019. But the results kept getting pushed further and further back. Each time it would promise the results soon, and they would give the amount of responses as the reason why the delays were. Just kept getting delayed, and the term getting kicked into long grass was used more than once. So, in the lead up to the 2019 general election, pretty much every single major political party promised reforms on the Gender Recognition Act. The Labour Party, the Liberal Democrats, the Green Party, they all promised to support changes to the Gender Recognition Act. It was all in their manifestos. The Conservatives were notably quiet on that front. The only thing I think Boris Johnson mentioned during the election was that he would look to preserve single-sex spaces. There's that phrase again. It's quite often used as a bit of a watchword by the gender-critical movement, which I will probably have to talk about in depth another time. In April 2020, Liz Truss, the Women's and Equalities Minister, the cabinet minister that's supposed to advocate for trans rights among other minorities, gave a very brief response to the GRA reforms. She listed 3 issues in her response, her initial preliminary response. First of all, the protection of single-sex spaces, which is extremely important. Again, it's that single-sex spaces thing. It's something which you hear time and time again from the gender-critical movement. And whenever you hear that, it rings alarm bells. Secondly, making sure that transgender adults are free to live their lives as they wish, without fear of persecution, whilst maintaining the proper checks and balances in the system. Again, that started off well, and then she talks about maintaining checks and balances, which, given what we know now, is a pretty strong indication she was going to scrap the changes all along. And finally, which is not a direct issue, concerning the Gender Recognition Act. So why is it coming up whilst you're talking about the Gender Recognition Act? But it is relevant. Making sure that under 18s are protected from decisions that they could make that are irreversible in the future. I believe strongly that adults should have the freedom to live their lives as they see fit, but I think it's very important that while people are still developing their decision-making capabilities, that we protect them from making those irreversible decisions. That's what she said in April 2020. Now, these comments immediately stirred up objections from every single political party, including her own. So, Labour, Lib Dems, Greens, they all condemned it, and the conservative LGBT group also condemned those comments. When she made those comments, it was extremely worrying. And there were a lot of objections, especially to the mention of protecting young people from irreversible decisions and irreversible changes. I could go into depth on this, but I need to keep this brief. The only intervention that happens with people who are under 18, so people who are not adults, is puberty blockers. These have been used since 1989, and literally all they do is stop the progression of puberty. If you come off them, your puberty resumes as normal. They're considered fully reversible. Why she is going on about making irreversible decisions, I don't understand. Especially when I'm someone who didn't have the knowledge, and therefore my body has gone through irreversible changes, which I'm now trying to do the best that I can to reverse them. But it's just not entirely physically possible. If I'd had the knowledge, would things have been different? Possibly. But I didn't have that chance. Again, thanks to the Conservatives and Section 28. In response to those comments, there were some trans people who started to plan to leave the UK, to move to a different country where they felt they would be more welcome. As a trans person, that worries me. Nobody should be felt that they're not safe in their own country by the politician, like the explicit politician who's supposed to be there to protect them. Then in June 2020, because we all know 2020's been an amazing year. June 2020, it was a bad time. Is a bad time. You had the whole fallout from J.K. Rowling, which is a whole different topic, which needs covering separately. Then the end of that week, June 14th, the Sunday Times published an article. They published details of a leaked document, supposedly a ready-to-publish manifesto of Liz Truss's proposals. Of the over 100,000 responses they had, 70% of them were positive. But the Conservative Party were deciding to just dismiss those, throw them in the bin, claiming they've been skewed by trans people and their allies. Who do you think's going to respond to a public consultation about an amendment to an act that literally only impacts trans people? Who do they expect to respond to it if not trans people and their allies? Why even have it if you're going to dismiss it on those grounds? So they're going to ignore that 70% positive response. Then they're going to scrap any changes to the GRA. If anything, the only thing that it sounds like they're going to change is to make it slightly more difficult to get a gender recognition certificate, not make it easier. And that they will also restrict trans women's access to single-sex spaces. These include refuges and women's toilets. Now, since the Equality Act was passed in 2010, there has not been one case, not one, where a trans person or someone imitating a trans person has assaulted, abused, or done anything wrong to a woman in a single-sex space. If there was, they'd be throwing it in our faces right now. But they can't, because there weren't any. They claim that we're a threat to cisgender women. They claim that men are going to pretend to be trans, because then we have to get that GRC so easily now, and go into these spaces and sexually assault women, even though there's no evidence for it. There's no statistics that support that self-identification leads to it, because it has no impact on these spaces. So why would it? Refuges are needed by trans people as much as cis people need them. Transgender people, okay, literally a rainbow has appeared in the window behind my camera right now as I'm recording this. It is raining and the sun is shining and there is a rainbow directly in front of me. It's just transgender people make up just under 1% of the UK population. That's the best estimate we have, because trans people are not included in the census. So we don't have a level, we don't know. Plus, we face persecution, so a lot of people who are trans try and hide it. I know they do, because I did for like 16 years. We make up less than 1% of the UK population, just under. Yet the proportion of trans people in UK prisons is 0.0125%. We are disproportionately smaller in prisons than we are in the general population. Yet we're being punished. We've had access to single-sex spaces for a decade, and there have been no reported cases of sexual assault or any other kind of assault of a trans person or someone imitating a trans person on a cisgendered woman, yet we're being punished. These changes which the government are proposing, they're unjust, they're undemocratic, and they are immoral. And if you agree with me on that, then we have to do something before it is too late. Before we see trans people who are already being attacked in these single-sex spaces. There was a case in Canada this last week of a trans woman getting physically assaulted by two women in a toilet. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just in a toilet. The two women got a male friend to come into the toilet to confront them as well. If you agree that what the government are trying to do is wrong, and my god, that is such a good rainbow right now. Can I flip the camera around? No, I'm just going to have to try and do it manually. Can you actually see that? Look at that rainbow, literally, as I'm filming this. That is awesome. If you believe what the government are trying to do is wrong, we need your help. Today, as I'm recording this, it is Global Pride. There was a trans rights protest in London. I never thought there'd be a trans rights protest in this country. That we would have to stand up and fight for our rights. It's crazy. Our human rights in the UK. There is a protest today in London. There is a protest next week in London, in Liverpool and in Exeter. There is a protest next week in Manchester. There is a protest the week after in Bristol and in Plymouth. These are the protests that I'm aware of. There may be others which I haven't seen, but I'm sure if you look online, you might be able to find one closer to you. Please, if you agree that this is wrong, we need your help. Like I said, we're less than 1% of the population. We cannot do this alone. We need to stand up and show the government that 70% is not just skewed figures. That this is what the British people want. This is what the British voters want. So please, stand by our side. We need your help. Thank you if you made it to the end of this video. If you do have any questions, please ask. I'm more than happy to answer any question, as long as it's polite and isn't really insensitive and rude. I will put links to the protests in the description below. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening.